What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this edition of Card Central 365 on STL Sports Central. This episode is powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. And, of course, all content on STL Sports Central is brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Brenden Schaeffer, along with Mike Claiborne of the Cardinals Radio Network, breaking things down. Claibs, last night we saw a very good version of Andre Pallante, who was able to right the ship after a few outings that didn't quite go his way. Of course, a lot of trade deadline talk to get into, but off the top, I'm curious for your interpretation of what we saw from Pallante last night.
That's a great question. I don't have an answer. Obviously, he was working on things between starts. That was as good as we've seen him in some time. And, he's a guy that has to get out of those troubled innings. He'll have one inning where things will start to come apart, and then he never recovers. Last night, he was in really good shape from start to finish. The ground balls were working for him. He had a potential Gold Glove left fielder in the lineup yesterday. So it was one of those nights that I'm anxious to talk to him today about what did he do and what did he take away from last night that he can apply for his next start.
And you mentioned it, Ivan Herrera getting the start in left field last night. What did you make of that? And what do you think Ivan himself made of it? That was a bit of a surprise for Cardinals fans yesterday.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise, but they've been working on that, I guess for about 3 weeks now. And most of the games, the times they would do is nobody would be at the ballpark or we'd be on the road. So it was something that, I think they were comfortable with. He talked about it before that, he did it many years ago, played in the outfield. And that's where most people thought he would play. And to be quite honest with you, after watching him catch, I'm amazed that the Cardinals had waited this long to give him a chance to play in the outfield, considering the catching skills just weren't where they needed to be at this time in his career. So, it worked out. He only had one ball that was hit to him. And I think the question is, how does he go back on balls? What happens if the game speeds up on him? And those are all things you probably learn in the minor leagues. But, we're going to do this on the job training here at the big league level. So we'll have to work with it and roll with it and just accept what it is. And I'm sure this offseason, that will be his main mission, is putting a glove on and working in the outfield. But it also adds up to this, though, Brenden. It makes the outfield more crowded. What does that mean for a Lars Nootbaar? I think it says the Burleson is going to be your DH, and they'll probably flip-flop that position depending on who's on the mound. And I think it puts Lars Nootbaar in a very awkward position right now.
Yeah, when you think about 2025 and the way the Cardinals might have seen Nootbaar's situation, I felt he and Donovan were in similar spots. Let's see what they do for a year, and then they're a year closer to free agency, or maybe we explore the contract extension route. From Donnie, you've seen everything you need to see, in my opinion, to make him a cornerstone. With Newt, the question was durability, right? And we haven't necessarily seen an improvement for him in that. And you hate to fault a guy for something of that ilk, but it always seems to be one injury after the next for Newt, Claibs. And I don't know how the Cardinals necessarily view that moving forward. You love the skills. It's tantalizing, but it's also got to be on the field.
Yeah, the skills are limited, though. I mean, because we haven't seen 3/4 of a season, to be honest with you. And, when he levels off, he's just a mere mortal. When you look at his strikeouts and his walks, and I know he's big on walks, but, man, his strikeouts are piling up too. He was pulling off the ball, and things just weren't going well for him. That doesn't mean he can't turn this around. I think he's out on assignment today or tomorrow in the minors. So we may see him, maybe late in the week, maybe somewhere out in California. But point being, he's got to step it up in order to make sure he has a spot for next year, because you have a bona fide left-handed hitter in Burleson. When you look at what Herrera's been able to do, I mean, you say, okay, this guy can play there too. So it really, jams up things. And who's to say there's somebody behind those guys in the minors that might not pop up on the scene next year? So critical time for him, intriguing time for the organization.
100%. And you also think about the versatility that you have with guys like Donovan that can move around. You probably pencil him for the infield. Another guy who you pencil for the infield, but stranger things have happened. I mean, J.J. Weatherholt is a name that we probably have to mention too for next year. If he makes his rise and is ready to join this roster, that's another name that you add to sort of a glut of position players that we know right now, when the team is fully healthy, they've got more than 9. on a daily basis. And so add Weatherholt's name into that mixture. It would seem to me, Claibs, that there would have to be, and I'm not saying who, but that there would have to be at least one or two names that could be traded between now and February when you report to spring training. Does that make sense with you from a position player?
It makes a lot of sense. The evaluation period is ongoing. I think we know who can do what. And, there's going to be a person you're going to part company with, and they may go elsewhere and have a very good career. But it won't be because they didn't get a chance here. Now, maybe they didn't produce. Maybe they stayed hurt. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons on why that takes place. But it's time, in my opinion, to turn the page and see what you have next. And Weatherholt is a guy that's going to be in that discussion.
Yeah, and you think about it, too. With John Mozeliak's front office, there's this narrative that isn't always fair, but it's the guy that didn't really pan out here, and then he goes somewhere else, and suddenly he's producing. And I think sometimes
we haven't had that
narrative.
many guys, though. You think about Rosarina and Garcia, but I mean, we haven't had anybody who really went somewhere else, and we're wringing our hands like, oh man, how do we let this guy get out of here? I mean, we just haven't had that very often, and that's the one thing. It's a plus and a minus for the Cardinals to say, well, this guy wasn't good anywhere compared to being just not good with us. So it's one of those deals that you're going to have it. It happens at every team that you're going to have someone move on, and you're going to say, man, I wish you could have had this guy back. Now, if you want to say Alcantara would be a guy like that, well, okay, I'll give you that. Cy Young Award winner, then he ended up with Tommy John, and now he's trying to find his way back. But you just don't see it as much as I think people expect to.
And that's what I'm saying. I think it's a narrative, not so much something that plays out in reality, but it becomes a little bit pervasive among fans, even if it doesn't match reality, which I wonder if at times that has led to the front office being a little bit more hesitant when it comes to, all right, we want to make sure we hold on to a guy and extract his value rather than maybe move somebody when the value is at its height. The reason I bring it up is I wonder with Chaim Bloom kind of sitting back, watching and learning about what the organization is about, but he doesn't have those emotions tied to, well, I drafted this guy. Could he be somebody that comes in and maybe has more of a willingness to do just that business-oriented, hey, it has to be done type of trade to clear a spot for some people next season?
I certainly hope so. Because if he's fallen in love with what we have now, then I don't know how this thing gets turned around. And that's not an indictment against the previous regime. They felt like these guys could produce. Now, for one reason or another, it just hasn't worked out. But I think a fresh face and some fresh eyes, and that's what he was hired for, to be a fresh set of eyes on the organization. He did an internal audit on what was going on and probably has some formulated opinions about what direction they need to go. And I'm good with that. I'm very good with that. And, you're right. He doesn't have an allegiance to anybody as far as players that have been drafted. So I think that gives the Cardinals a leg up on being able to formulate a system, an organization, a program, whatever you want to call it, to take you to that next level, a level that we at one point established where everybody wanted to be like the Cardinals.
And I think the fastest way to do that is certainly to get that leg up again in the pitching department. Yes. And I believe Chaim Bloom has been, he was given the runway to hire some people to come in and help with the infrastructure. And I think they've got some really sharp people. The problem right now just seems to be, even with some of those guys in the minors, man, staying healthy. We see Tekoa Roby go down with the Tommy John as well. Recently seeing some decline in velo for Quinn Matthews. Claibs, I just was wondering, when you just see the rash of injuries, not at the major league level, they've kept those guys healthy, but is there anything to take away from the number of injuries to starting pitchers in AAA this year? Or is it just one of those deals that you kind of throw your hands up and say, we couldn't have really expected this. Now we simply have to react to it?
Yeah, I think it's just part of the way you do business these days. I mean, what team doesn't have a guy with Tommy John? Okay. I think Tink Hence has had a number of different injuries that are a little bit perplexing, but it comes with the art of pitching. Quinn Matthews, I think, is a guy that we probably needed to push the brakes on anyway, because he's not a swing and miss guy compared to some other guys like Roby might have been that guy. But when you start losing velo and control and a shoulder, that's not what you would hope to have. But there's time. And I think the other item here is we need to start thinking about who's next beyond those guys. And those guys we're talking about now are in AA or high A. I don't think there's anybody in AAA right now that can come to the rescue as a starter. You have some guys who've been on the Memphis Shuttle who've done a nice job. When you think about Granillo and you think about Swanson, those guys have done a nice job. But overall, I don't know if something goes wrong with one of these pitchers after the deadline, who's going to start? And I think that's a concern. I mean, I think Leahy might be a guy that might get a look if that comes about. But other than that, I don't see anybody who's shown me enough. And obviously I haven't seen all the minor leagues, but I just feel like at this point, that's the one element you have to beef up, and you need variety. You need swing and miss guys. You need guys with ground ball stuff. You need guys who can utilize the defense. So, it's not 98 plus. I think it's control. Control is really what makes you win ball games. Now you can throw hard and, probably have Tommy John at some point, and that's fine. And most guys come back these days better. But that whole year off, stunts the growth of not only the player, but certainly the organization. So when you look at it along that line, you better have more arms than you have games for, in my opinion. And I'll go back to this. You and I sat around spring training. We looked around and said, hey, man, this Memphis team is going to be pretty good. Look at all this pitching we're going to send them. Well, obviously, here comes July. What are we doing? We're looking for pitching. And, it's not just the Cardinals. You go around baseball, everybody's looking for the same thing, pitching. Legitimate pitching, not guys who've been able to pitch. I'm talking about guys who can pitch right now. And there's a big difference.
Yeah, and the depth, of course, when we looked at that Memphis team, it's just all, Tommy Johns and various injuries that have plagued it throughout the season. There are some names at AA that are progressing along, but that's not something that's knocking on the door just yet. Those guys are going to need time to develop. That's where a concern comes in, and we'll talk a little bit about this upcoming deadline, Claibs, and some expectations as it looms later on this week. But when you look at some of the, I think back to 2023 when they had a sell-off at the deadline, and then some of the guys that kind of came in off the street that were just filling innings down the stretch, you want to probably avoid having just a wholesale changes that leads to that, because that was a pretty bleak time. But I do want to mention two names, not long-term names, but if push came to shove, they have 36-year-old Aaron Wilkerson and another veteran, Zach Plesac, kicking around in Memphis. I see you shaking your heads. That kind of remind you of, we did see Casey Lawrence. We did see a Jacob Barnes a couple of years ago. None of us want to see it come to that, Claibs, but as the Cardinals navigate this notion of, do we sell on a Maton, on a Helsley, and then still have enough innings to get through the season productively? How do you kind of view that balance with the trade deadline 2 days away?
I think it's a dangerous precedent to set. I think it sends a very lack of confidence message to your organization, certainly to your fans. And, because it says, wait a minute, this is the best you can do. This is what we have in the minors. And, it's nothing against those guys personally, but let's face it. They're there for a reason, because they're not good enough to be here at the big league level on a regular basis. And, it could be skill, it could be age, it could be a lot of different things. But that's not who you want to hold a line until next year. I just think that sends a bad message. And let's hope it doesn't come to that. But it's concerning.
Yeah, and as we kind of get into that thought process, Claibs, when you think about the name Ryan Helsley and a Phil Maton, I think those are two of the big names. We know they have been key to the Cardinals back into the bullpen. What do you expect to happen this week? Is there a chance one or both of these guys are moved when you look at the trade market beginning to heat up here?
Well, I think they will. Depending on what the Cardinals get in return. I don't think you can get as much for a 2-month rental as you can for a guy who still has control for a season. If you were going to move Helsley, you probably should have done it in the offseason. You didn't have any idea what Maton was going to do because you didn't sign him until the end of spring training. Steven Matz is a guy who really is having his best season out of the bullpen, but Steven Matz has the moniker of being injured a lot. And he's had a couple setbacks here recently, But, can you rent them for a month or two? Yeah, sure you can. But I don't think somebody's going to say, hey, Brenden, we're going to give you our third best prospect for one of these guys. I just don't see that happening. They're going to give you something, but I'm looking for guys who can help me by July of next year. Okay. He comes to spring training. He catches the eye of somebody. We pay attention to him. You start him off at maybe high AA, 2 weeks later, maybe he's in AAA. Who knows what the process is? But I'm thinking come this time next year, this is a guy supposed to be on the ball club for what I'm moving. Now, is that going to happen? And the other thing is this. You're going to start trading with teams. You better look at teams who have a similar philosophy on how they develop players, where you're not bringing in a guy. And if you look at the trades that we made in 23, who's still left? Mm-hmm. Is it John King? Is he the only one left?
King's there. Roby's obviously injured.
He's hurt. Drew Ron, so we haven't.
Is around, but not as a pitcher.
Yeah, but so JC is just a guy right now. I mean, there's no spot for him. So my thing is, let's start looking at organizations that have what we like in players. Do business with them. Why am I doing business with the Pittsburgh Pirates? They can't develop anybody. Why am I doing business with the Chicago White Sox? They can't develop anybody. So I'm looking for teams who've had the ability to show guys the way, where they're close to being ready, but we think because we have a more urgent need, we can part company with him because we have somebody else behind him.
Yeah, that's really the dynamic that the Cardinals are going to have to figure out. And as you said, picking up guys that conceivably could help out by next year's team. We'll talk a little bit after this about maybe how they can approach it and do that successfully. But before I do that, I want to remind you that nothing beats relaxing on a hot summer day and watching baseball. And the simplest way to get in on the action is to download the Pick 6 app from DraftKings. It's crazy simple. You just pick more or less on the stats for two or more of your favorite players, and boom, you're in the mix for big cash prizes. Pick 6 is available right here in Missouri, so don't miss out on the fun and don't settle for a smaller payout. Switch to Pick 6, and right now, new customers can get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
So, Claibs, I want to get your thoughts on this. They say, hey, we got to trade for guys who are not far away, which is what you just said. The window could be starting next year. Is there a way to accomplish that at this deadline, though? Because it seems as though the Cardinals might be hesitant to give up on some of those guys with team control, especially pending Chaim Bloom taking over things and being able to put his own stamp on what the roster looks like. Is that something where we see maybe more transformation in November than we do right now in July?
Yeah, I would think that would be a pretty good way to look at it. You're not going to fix your ball club on one trade deadline. Okay. That's not how it's going to work. These are going to be complements to what you already have. The real big hunting takes place in the offseason, starts with the general managers meetings. We used to go to the winter meetings and expect a big free agent signing or a major trade. That's fizzled out over the years. And that's something that baseball probably needs to take a look at. And I know they have a lot of things to look at, but what is it about free agency where you look at the other sports, the first day of free agency, they take over the headlines more than, and I'll give you all three examples. The first day of free agency, whether it's the NBA or the NFL or the NHL, would all take place during the baseball season.
Right.
They make the headlines more than baseball does. If the Yankees were playing the Dodgers, there would be more people talking about what teams sign what free agents in those respective sports compared to a marquee game going on in Major League Baseball. Now, you can say, well, it's only 162. I get that. But those sports have been able to commandeer days on the baseball calendar and make their game more important than the games we have playing as we speak. And now we've taken it where when we do have the floor to ourselves while those teams are playing in the winter, we still can't figure it out. And it just goes on and on and on, and people are standing around. It's just they have a chance to really garner a lot of interest, but the old practices really, in my opinion, don't work as far as trying to get the name of this game out there. This game has got some real problems in front of it. It has an awful TV situation locally and nationally. A labor issue is just around the corner. And you have rules that you're concerned about implementing in just how the game is taught, and talking about rosters and injury patterns. There's a lot of things that this game needs to address. And one of which is creating interest. Hearing about a 3-team deal, or hearing about a guy signing for a contract that you never thought he was going to sign with this team. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do without even throwing a pitch to create interest in the game. And I think the other sports have caught up to Major League Baseball and are taking full advantage of it.
Yeah, and it is a lot that has to be tackled. I don't know if you saw, Claibs, the story out from Jeff Passan regarding Bryce Harper's thoughts on some of the things that Commissioner Manfred was maybe discussing in their clubhouse. That's the kind of, like, whatever you think about that, it is one of those deals where, man, it probably shows about where we are in terms of the discord that could be looming when it comes to the next round of CBA negotiations.
So, not picking a side here, I want to be clear on that.
Sure.
I think both sides don't trust each other, which is why we have this issue.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I want Bryce Harper, he's part of that 10%.
Right.
Who's making the 72%, speaking on my behalf if I am a fledgling player, or I'm that mid-level guy who's trying to make sure I have a future. And while I've heard the Major League Baseball, the Players Association push back on a cap, as I look at the other sports, they seem to be doing okay. I mean, and they can easily say, well, they have more guys than we do. I mean, they have less guys, like in the NBA, they have less guys. What about the NFL? They have almost twice as many, and we're seeing guys making stupid money these days. Now, granted, their shelf life isn't as long, but neither is Major League Baseball. So I'm just trying to figure out where they feel like this restricts them, especially if you have a floor. Remember, part of the issue is with these other leagues, they are partners. They share in merchandise. They share in the TV revenue. They share in the ticket sales. And, and the NBA gets, I think, one more point more than the owners do. So when you see that, you say to yourself, well, what's the problem? Now, are we thinking in an antiquated term where we think it's restricting? The game is already restricted. They're already shown they're going to pay X amount of dollars to certain people. And everybody else has to fend for themselves. The shelf life of a player in Major League Baseball is less than 4 years. And you don't really get a full pension until you get 10 in. You look around the game and you see where the veteran player is almost extinct when it comes to having that veteran bat. And I'll give you a good example. The Cardinals were very good at that in the early 2000s. They got a Will Clark or a Larry Walker or a Woody Williams. They found guys who still had something left, who were able to make a contribution. Who are those guys now? They're not there anymore because the league is priced. The league say, well, they price themselves out of the game. No, you don't want to pay them. And that's the problem that we have. Even in in the NBA, they have an exception rule for a veteran. If you have X amount of years in, this is the minimum you can make. Okay. And it may not be $20 million, but I think it's somewhere around 3 to 4 million. Hey, you got 10 years in the league, you're near the end of the trail. You can't tell me that 3 or 4 million doesn't help for the mistakes you may have made in some of your other contracts. So I'm just trying to figure out where the players feel like this is like a taboo. And if you're going to be a spokesperson, let's find some guys who probably have a little bit more at stake than guys who making most of the money.
I guess the biggest question I would have in terms of the comparison, you mentioned like the shelf life for MLB. The baseball of the 4 sports is the one where you have such a vast minor league system where the control over these players during their prime athletic years is before these guys in baseball can make money. So I would feel like if there's going to be a cap, which we know they're opposed to on the player side, they might have to do something on the front end, Claibs, to where Because I mean, you can have a guy for 5 years in the minors,
Yeah.
6 years in the bigs.
I knock a guy off. You know what? I knock a year free agency off.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe I get rid of arbitration. I mean, there's ways that you can find balance here. And if you and I can sit here and get out of batter's box and we're on our way to first base, surely people who get paid to do this on a daily basis can't figure it out when all they have is time. You and I have other things to do today. They have people that sit in a room and this is all they think about is how they can make this thing work. So I think we have to do a couple things here. We need to have that conversation on how it used to be. And I understand there were times when the owners didn't trust the players, and I know the players didn't trust the owners. But at some point, there's got to be an olive branch extended and say, hey, look, man, we have to put this stuff behind us because there's nothing we can do about it. But here's what we can do, not only for today's game, but for the future. And if you don't like it, come back in 2 years or 3 years and have some openers, some things that trigger an opener to renegotiate a certain element of the contract. I mean, it's not, I don't want to go overboard here, but I don't think it's that hard.
Yeah.
You can build in safeguards and say, hey, look, man, we might need to tweak this clause. And they may say, well, let's set a parameter on if we hit this number or we don't make that number, we can go in and find a way to make up the difference. Is that too hard to do? Where everybody gets like something out of it?
That should be something that happens too, Claibs, to get out of here on this note before December 1st of 2026. Like, it feels like we're already resigned to that being the starting point. I get it that deadlines make for leverage, but man, you'd like to think that people understand that baseball is important enough to folks out there that you don't wait till December 1st to really get cracking on this thing.
Well, you know what? Here's what really troubles me. When you hear a player say, we're prepared to sit out 162. Well, you can because you've made $30 million a year. But what about players who don't make that money? What about people who are associated with the game who don't make that money? What about they can't afford to sit out 162? So when I hear people on that pedestal make those statements, that's the wrong process. Now, if you really think that's cute, go ask the National Hockey League when they got locked out twice, they broke that union. Okay.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it was for the betterment because that union can't come to realization that they weren't the NBA or the NHL or the NFL when it came to the TV revenue and just the marketing plan. But they got what they want. They have reasonable harmony. They had to learn how to work with a cap, and it works for the most part. But they stay in a swim lane that they can navigate. They don't have $15, $20 million players that's eating up most of the cap. General managers are smarter about that. They closed some of the loopholes here recently to make sure we don't have guys signing these 8 and 10-year deals. And I think here's another thing about baseball. You know what? You can't have a deal longer than 5 years, period. Now, if you're a good player, you can get back in line and sign up for five more. If you're a bad player, then maybe you get 2 years. But to sit there and say, we're going to sign a guy for 12 years, and in 3 years or 4 years, his contract is obsolete, and he's complaining, I don't get that. So there's a lot of things on the table, so they need to get their asses in gear now compared to waiting until the season's over with. And if nothing else, circle the things that are important, okay?
Yeah.
So if we can throw 5 things on the board, you win 2, I win 2, we find another one in the middle that we can come to an agreement on, or maybe we just say, look, we're not going to agree on that, so let's just throw that out. Then I think that's a better way to negotiate than negotiate through the media where things can be misconstrued. We don't know what the tone of the quote was. So I think that we need to try and figure out some sort of sensibility here before we get too deep into this.
Yeah, I think most baseball fans can agree with that. Let's get the ball rolling rather than wait it out. And I do think about that Bryce Harper quote. I wonder in that clubhouse, the 23rd, 4th, and 5th guy are sitting there going, wait, we're prepared to give up how many games?
Exactly. That just, hey, Bryce, why don't we just have another COVID episode where we can lose money doing that too? At least you got paid for that. But I just think that to go into this engagement saying we're willing to give up a season to prove a point, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Have we not learned
else,
anything over the years?
if nothing else, it does show how far apart those sides are at the end of the day. So
Yeah, I mean, and again, maybe if it wasn't Bryce Harper, who's financially set for life, maybe if it wasn't him making that statement, I'd say, well, maybe they found something they feel is worth fighting for. Bryce, you have your money, bro, and I'm happy you have it. But there's a whole bunch of guys that don't make that kind of money, and they have a lot of things in front of them. You'll have your 10 years in, you'll have your pension, you'll have multi-millions of dollars to live off of with you and your family, and good for you. But man, everybody doesn't live like that. And if you think this is for the betterment of the union, I think you're mistaken. Because at last check, the one thing I haven't heard anybody in the NBA and the NFL say is we got to get rid of the cap. It's killing us. I don't hear that. So, I just think when you look at the big picture of things, we got to figure this out.
And here's the hope.
Now
that
we spend way too much time on this subject, but anyways, it's out there, so it is what it is.
Well, you know what? We've also got trade deadline stuff coming up. 8 a.m. on Thursday. You can check out myself and Joe Roderick with the morning primer. They'll be live as well on STL Sports Central toward the end of that trade deadline period around 5 o'clock Central. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel on YouTube. But that's going to do it for us here on Card Central 365, powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. And, of course, the content here on STL Sports Central is brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. He's Mike Claiborne. I'm Brenden Schaeffer. Stay tuned tonight for the postgame.